What if young home buyers didn't miss their chance, but they're walking into one of the most confusing housing markets of their lives?
Because right now, everything feels expensive. Home prices are high, interest rates are high, rent is high. And for a lot of people, the dream of owning feels less like a goal and more like a trap.
And that's where people are getting crushed, not just by the price of the house, but by the payments, the interest, the closing costs, the pressure, the fear of missing out, and the belief that if they don't buy right now, they're going to be left behind forever.
But buying your first home shouldn't be an emotional panic attack. It should be a strategy because done right, home ownership can build your wealth, stability, and long term freedom.
Done wrong, it can leave you broke, stressed, house poor, and stuck in a life you can't actually afford.
So today, we're sitting down with the president of Next Wave Mortgage, Phil Ganz, who has spent more than 26 years helping people understand their mortgages, first time home buying, down payment assistance, and what it takes to buy a home the right way.
This is not just a conversation about how to get approved for a mortgage, because getting approved doesn't mean that you're ready. And the biggest loan you qualify for is not always the best decision for your life.
So if you ever looked at the housing market and thought, did I miss my chance? Can I even afford this? Is buying a home still possible for someone like me? This episode's for you.
Because the real question is not just, can I buy my first home?
It's how do I buy my first home without getting completely crushed? This is episode 196 of the Five Guys podcast. Let's get into it.
Gantz, thank you so much for joining me here on the Five Guys podcast. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Chris, so much for having me. I'm really looking forward for the journey. So let's get the podcast started. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. Well, for our audience, Phil has been in the mortgage industry for the last 26 years. And Phil, I think we should start the conversation here. A lot of our audience, they're Gen Z, they're millennials, and they're in that age range where they're really trying to build wealth, invest, maybe start a family. And at the same time, they're looking at home prices and mortgages rates, and they're thinking to themselves, well, shit, did I miss my shot? So I want to start the conversation right there. Is home ownership still one of the best wealth building tools, or has the math changed in 2026?
Yeah, I've seen that. Even if, say, you pretended this was like you thought the market was going to go down, which it's not. Well, let's just say you did it. I would still tell you to buy. Home ownership fundamentally has been the best investment since we've been tracking home ownership. And I think that's really important to know, right? It's not like fancy, but it's like tried and true. And it's the only investment that you can make where you're using leverage and you get 100% of the results. And what I mean by that is, say you buy a house for $300,000 and you put down 3%, $9,000, right? You get 100% of the gain, which is great, right? Typically, if you invest 9,000 in Amazon stock or 9,000 in Bitcoin. You only get based on the 9,000. In real estate, you get the whole gain, which is great. And I think that's, it's amazing. Plus, it has better utility. You can live there, So I'm definitely big into people buying a house. I think it's the easiest way for to become a millionaire.
That is one nice thing. The one thing that I always say about investing in real estate is the only investment that the average American intuitively understands. I can understand, I can go buy stock, I can buy these things which are considered quote unquote assets, but I can't live in my stock portfolio. I can't live in my crypto accounts. I can live in my house.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Right. You look at the utility, right? And the utility value of a home ownership is you get to live there. You get to enjoy there. It's great. So I'm a huge fan of people buying home ownership because it's easy to understand, right? Your grandparents get it. Their grandparents got it. Makes sense. When you get into some of these fancy investments, you had to be really smart to understand it. It's not a good investment. Most
Yeah,
times, it's a gambler. And I know people will say, they'll be like, well, I won. Well, that's how you get addicted to gambling, is winning, not losing. You're like, well, what would you do? Buy real estate. I'm just saying because it's the easiest way to like get in for almost anyone, and it just goes up over time. And that's the real beauty, right? And you're like, well, that sounds boring. Look, I'm not here to be exciting. I'm here to help you become rich.
Certainly. Well, you say that, it's really easy right now. It's easy to buy real estate. Is that still true even now? I mean, there's a lot of people all across the United States that are getting completely priced out, even with a good income, can still barely afford to make the mortgage payments.
Well, this is true, right? You got 50 states, there's 50 countries that are all tied together, right? So you're like, well, geez, we got this hard math equation. It's simple. If you don't make enough, you need to get someone with them and buy together. Or you move that you can. And people say, oh, you can't, like I did, right? This is what I tell people is that, I risked everything. I've been in Florida for 5 years. Life was great in Massachusetts. I didn't have to take any risk. And I risked everything for a Florida dream. It worked out great. Everything's great. But you're like, would you really take that risk? Would you ever advise someone to take the risk? And people do all the time. There's lots of people that relocate, right? And that's the thing. Can you stay, if you're like, say, in a major city like LA, even Miami? I mean, if you're talking about Florida's an affordable state, like, what do you end up doing? You move, right? Like, you gotta sometimes move if the equation doesn't work. Do you miss out on the best opportunity you could? And I get it. I totally get people like, I can't move. I can't. I don't know, right? Like, and getting rich isn't for everyone, right? People will say, like, what does it take? I think one thing that's a common theme, unless you inherit money, is sacrifice. At some point, there's going to be sacrifice. If you want to get rich, there's a sacrifice. That means you may have to move. I tell people that, and they're like upset that I would tell them that they can't. It's actually probably easier to move in 2026 than any other time in history. Easy to move. You can work from home. Half these jobs you can work from home now. Even the ones you're not supposed to work from home, you're working from home, right? So I would say you gotta be willing to make the sacrifice. And there's many sacrifices. Relocation would be one. The other is cutting your spending, saving more, cutting back, right? Better you make the choice of you cutting back than someone else making the choice for you. And at the end of the day, when you get older, that's what happens, right? I'm like at this weird spot in my life. Sunday was my birthday. I just turned 48. It's like halfway, you're like halftime. And, it's either I make the choices and I'm way more careful now on things than before. Because I want to make the choice. I don't want someone else to make the choice. So I would say there's plenty of opportunities in America. America's the greatest country. And so I have to ask you is, what was the John F. Kennedy thing? Don't ask what the country can do for you, but what you can do for the country. Well, I'm going to redo it. Move and make the country better. Right? That's what I would tell people. But, stay focused is what I would tell people to be willing to make a sacrifice. If getting rich is important to you, like I said, there's plenty of happy people that are not wealthy. And wouldn't be the right avatar, right? I'm here to help people that say, hell, let's get rich today. And they will tell you how to do it.
Yeah. You talked a lot about sacrifice. And when I think about sacrifice, I think people will typically avoid sacrifice because of fear. So when young people, usually first-time buyers, are coming to you right now, Phil, what's the biggest fear that they usually have?
I think the biggest fear that they have is they can't afford it. They're balancing in their mind of like what they would have to cut back. I mean, you get this on a lot. They're like, they start off with this, like, I don't want to be house poor. Okay. And I'm listening. And because I think the biggest thing is you always want to create stats line on what's important to you. Start talking, if you love vacations. Vacations are great. And all these things, waste things like what car do you drive? Mercedes, brand new. Okay. All these things. At the end of the day, what I would tell people is that, there's no way in my mind, and I've seen successful people. I think what's not like always shown is like what people had to do to get to a certain spot in life. Right. And I think sometimes like, sometimes you learn how to sacrifice. I mean, for me, parents divorce. It taught me, you're going to learn what sacrifice is, right? You're gonna learn when you spread the money further along. Got to stretch, you know. That's what I would tell you. And I think, that's some people never learned that because the parents had always said yes, and then they got in this weird situation, like where they never made a sacrifice, and then you're trying to teach them at 24 to make a sacrifice. They're not having that. I'm dealing with this. I deal with this all the time. I can tell who's made sacrifices to not. All you have to do is ask about their parents and then ask what car they drive. And then I'll tell you if you're going to buy a home anytime soon.
So for those who aren't comfortable with sacrifice, who've maybe never had to sacrifice because they've always been cared for, can we do anything for those people? Or from your standpoint, do you just have to kind of let them go out into the
You
world?
got to
and
let them
realize-
go. Certain people, this is like asking me to, make your basketball team. I'm not really good at basketball. And not everyone's going to get rich or everyone's going to be a homeowner. Well, everyone has the right to be a homeowner. Not everyone will be a homeowner. Right? This is a big thing. It's like, what are you willing to put in? And you see this in life, right? Too much of America is these overnight successes. And there's never been an overnight success. Not one. This is all like, look at the music world. I mean, it's one sacrifice after the next, or the Olympics, or any of these things. It's just a lot of sacrifices. I think it makes easier if you've had parents that taught you how to sacrifice. If you haven't sacrificed or not willing to, I think that was like a parenting problem. Well, like, I don't think your parents did a good enough job. That's the reality. You didn't have good parents in terms of they didn't teach you what you needed to do to sacrifice. Now, not every family says, "Hey, let's get rich, let's make some money." Right? I think these are generational things. Why some families always stay wealthy, and some families never have anything. Right? And you're like, "Well, wow, that's interesting." But I know right away if someone's willing to make the sacrifice. I can just tell.
What if someone hears this and they're like, I'm willing to make the sacrifice, but I'm still afraid of it because I don't understand? Or I guess, what do most people misunderstand about affordability?
Well, what I would say is that when you go from rent to owning, typically your payment increases 30%. So right there, what are we doing with this 30%? Right? What are we going to cut back so you can do that? And most people can make this in a lot of America. In certain parts of America, it's much more difficult, right? But you have choices. People think, well, I don't have choices. You always have a choice, And like, I've seen it, My dad made a choice to come to the United States in 1968 when Russia invaded. That was his choice, right? And then he was poor for a long time, making sacrifice, right? And I think that's what it's about. It's harder to wrap your mind on what we'll really do, but it's almost like, hey, I want to, take sports seriously or music seriously. This is the thing about Facebook. I love music. You see people now, these young kids, they can go on and rip music like never seen, right? And I think I go, that was easy. Now that kid worked really hard, and it was really hard. They really put in the effort, the 10,000 hours to make that happen. And that's what I want for people. And that's why I tell people what's needed. Because the reality is this: you're your average of your 5 friends. You are. And if your friends don't own a home, you're not. Right? You're not. There's no way. Like, if you're an average and you have 5 and you're 0 for 5, there's no chance. Right? And your family's renters. You got to do it. You got to be able to go deep and make the adjustments. Right? I mean, that's what it is. That's like the difference between potential and people doing it, is the people doing it are really doing it. And I get this, people, they struggle, but over time, people with compounding efforts can really get ahead, because it's not what you make, it's what you save.
Completely agree. That's one of the big tenets here at the Fi Guys. So when someone hears this, they're like, all right, I'm willing to make the sacrifice, Phil. I'm willing to do what it requires of me to be a homeowner. Do you think the goal should be to buy the dream home, or just to get into the game responsibly?
Get in the game. I think this is a big mistake. People confuse, prom for mirror. It's prom. You just need to get in. Because people start saying this needs to be perfect, and that, and this, and that, and this. No, it doesn't. You just got to get experience and start with one, right? Because like the reality is that your savings rate will never exceed inflation and your job income. Like, it's just going to be higher, and it's going to move further away, especially for like the middle class. The low to middle class, the people that are just starting out, yeah, you're like, what do I do? Like, you got to get in. You got to start. You just got to start. Because even success, like people that have money that are helping your kids, they start out at like 2, 3. They're starting these kids out early, like middle class people or low to moderate income people. They're like, when do you start? They're like, yeah, we start early at 22, 23. Nope. A lot of families are starting the kids off at 2, 1. You're like, no way. Yeah, like I dealt with this one guy, and it's like kid's 18 and owned like 99 apartments or something. I'm like, this is a joke. I'm like, how is this? And like, basically the whole thing was like buying properties at a young age. And like, look, the dad tremendously helped.
Mm-hmm.
But I will also say this: the dad definitely helped, but the kid was definitely also at the same time probably the most sophisticated 18-year-old. Like, if his dad had died, he could have taken over this empire, like right away. And most people would have never been able to do that. So he already had that experience. And so, I think people have to start right away, because you are already behind. Even though like a lot of people think they're starting young, compared to who? Oh, your 5 friends, you're young. But like, that's what I've realized. I think of Florida, I've run into some people that really have money. I get it from Boston, but I think Florida, they have some, especially South Florida, you have some way more wealthy people, and they're ready to go, right? And I think Florida, the people are more aggressive, a little bit. I think this is why we lead the world in car accidents. But you got to take a risk in life. You got to gamble a little bit. But home ownership is your safest path forward. It's a positive net asset if you hold. And I will also say this in terms of getting uncomfortable. Year 1, when you own a home, you're automatically going to lose money. And you have to be comfortable with that. Because if you have to sell the home, you're going to pay a realtor. So you're like, oh, this isn't good. And the market can go. Yeah, just buy it. You'll be fine. Because if you hold it for like 5 or 10 years, you're up huge.
So when you're
you
saying
know?
that someone needs to go out and purchase a home, are you saying a primary home, or are you really maybe pushing towards rentals, or what's the thought process here that they just need
I
to
would
get
say
in?
your first one should be your primary. That's where you can learn to fix things and how to do things. You know, it really does. That's where you become like a grown up a little bit. You know, like if you own a home, then like you know how to take care of a home, and then when you become a landlord that transcends. Like today, I own a rental property. It is in Boston, and like these girls were like, "It's hot." Whatever, AC stopped working. Right? What happened? I don't know. They probably like opened up the windows and they froze the AC, and then like whatever, like it didn't work, and now we had to unfreeze the AC. Like if you owned a home and you were like 24, like you would have been able to like quickly realize let's not unfreeze our AC, right? And I think certain things like this, like if you own a home, you take responsibility, like changing your air filter, changing certain things, right? Like you become a grown up. So I think you should, and there was an article of this I read in the Boston Globe. Should you buy a second home or no? I think you should buy a primary. People aren't ready for that in the beginning, right? There's a certain, I think, I think with experience, it matters. There's a big translation. Even if you have the talent, I think experience can really is the most biggest predictive of success, right? You need experience, right? And then you know you need to been through it. So buy your first home is what I would tell you.
Okay. So getting in there yourself, getting your hands dirty, seeing that you can do this on your own before you go and start trying to create your real estate empire, whatever that might be to most people.
Yeah, I think this is the right way to do it. You got to kind of take it the comedian rock band type of way. Grind out yourself before you go to the main stage, right? You got to practice. And people want to go straight to the top. They think they can. I don't know. I don't think they can, right? I think you'll lose a lot of money unless you get really lucky. But I wouldn't. I'll just buy your first home, something as affordable as possible, and go from there.
Yeah. You just talked about a lot of people that just want to go straight to the top of the mountaintop without having to walk the journey. Where do you see most people like right now overextending themselves in the goal to buy their first house like as soon as possible?
Yeah, you know what I would tell people is this. So when we analyze the deal, there's two ratios. The front ratio, which is your mortgage, your taxes, your insurance, and your PMI. And then your back end ratio. It's your front ratio plus all your debt. Where people are getting extended is really their back ratio, not their front ratio. Usually the more like, if they didn't have debt, the mortgage ratio is actually fine. It's the back ratio. And you're like, no way. Yep. The debt is killer. Debt in America is really killer. And that's what I would tell you. You know, you gotta get your debt out of control before you buy. That's why you need to start this so early. Like the more you think of it, the earlier it should be.
Where do you see most people that you're working with right now holding that debt?
Car loans, financing vacations, some student loans. I think the student loans are a big problem in America. I do. I think people are getting these student loans with no strategy in mind, like no hope. I don't even know what they're doing. You know, it's really they're taking all this debt. They don't even know what debt is, right? In fact, college prices once they had the opportunity to finance student debt, I think it was in '77 or '78. What's the federal government? It was Jimmy Carter. Once Jimmy Carter allowed for this to happen, college prices went through the roof. It used to be affordable. Once colleges could make a profit, everything went up. Tuition went through the roof. So did teacher salaries, tenures, all sorts of crazy things. Look at the colleges from like 1965. They looked fine. They look like The difference between that college and that high school wasn't as big as now. Now that people can finance debt, colleges have turned this into a for-profit business. So I think a lot of people are making terrible mistakes of college. And not that I'm not for education. I'm 100% for education. You just need to know what you're getting yourself into and take it seriously and not take up that debt. Now, if that means you go to a lesser school and not put yourself in debt to the eyeballs, that's what you do. You don't take out that crazy debt. No way. That's what I tell anyone. You're crazy. Starting off that young with that, you don't have a right to take out $300,000 of debt. It should be completely illegal. Like, what do you think you're going to be? The starting quarterback for the Steelers? Like, you have no chance to pay this back, right? And these kids have no idea. They just, just add it on, They'll never get out. And then they got to deal with the cars. And for whatever reason, people keep on getting these new cars. I think you're going to die in a couple of years. Haven't you seen Cuba? That car's running the same cars in 1950, or Russia. Any of these countries, cars last forever. Only in America, the cars last 5 years or 3 years. And people get to debt to the eyeballs. So I think people have to make cuts. I think, people have to look in the mirror and make big adjustments. It's like when we got a 7-month-old baby Madison, we always have her look in the mirror and do affirmations. I am beautiful. I am smart. We should have like affirmations. I will cut the debts. I will not have student loans. I will not have car loans. I'll change the affirmation for baby Madison to get her right on track.
You just mentioned a big thing that I'm thinking out a lot. You have a new baby, 7 months old. A lot of people are delaying having their families because they feel like I can't even get my first home. I can't start on this ladder. Do you think people should wait to buy their first home until they've paid off their debts, until they feel more fiscally responsible? Because that's going to go contrary to what you said earlier, and just get into the game as early as you can.
Yeah, boy, that's like I said, everything's like nuanced. This is actually a really smart question when you think. You just can't be like completely overextended. If I had to give any young person, and like everyone's goals in life are different. So I'd have to interview the person. Do you want to be rich? Yes or no? So I think the first thing you need to do is create status alignment. The second thing you got to do is create contrast. And then the third thing we got to do is move this plane along. Right? And so I'd say to the person, let's create alignment. Do you want to be rich? Yes or no? Do you want to have the sacrifices? Are you willing to, like, all the questions? And then you have the contrast, right? But what do I think for people? Like, this maybe have to be completely uncomfortable, right? If you have debt, you might have to move back home if they allow it, right? Completely cut everything out, right? And not get in any fancy cars. Like, I was started at a young age. Like, I would tell people, like, I need to speak to you at 18. It's unfair when you say to me, hey, I'm 28 and I'm debating a house and a kid. But I would tell you this, if I was debating a house and a kid and all this stuff, I'll say, look, kids are the greatest gift. Don't delay that. This is silly. Have your kids. You can also buy a house. You can do both at the same time. This is crazy for people not to buy kids. You should have it. But, first kid, like a baby Madison, 7 months, born October 7th, 2025. And I say that because, I'm happy with baby Madison, but, if people have kids earlier in life or later in life, kids are always a blessing. So they're saving for things, but they waste. See, the thing is, I actually think this kid will make you work harder and cut out your vacations and your nonsense. This is what really happens. If you look at it, if this was true, don't have kids, then how come all the CEOs of major corporations have kids? Right? Most of them. I know you'd point to, Elon Musk has like 13 kids, right? A lot of them. You know what? Very few successful CEOs don't have any kids, right? Steve Jobs had kids on the second marriage. His first kid, and all these I know he regretted actually not being a good enough father, right? That's his big regret. Even the world's best biggest businessman, the best one, his biggest regret was not was getting in the way of his personal relationship with his kids, right? There's regret there. So I think, it didn't stop any of these top people. So why is it going to stop you? So kids won't stop you. They'll make you a better version of yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of young people are at right now that are thinking, should I have kids and I need to wait till I have the house till I have the kids because there's this order that we all kind of think of when we think of being an adult. And like it first starts with the house, then I have the kids, then I have move on from here. Do you think that still stands or do we need to just maybe switch the order around or just realize that that was just a story that used to work,
Yeah,
it doesn't
I
work
probably,
anymore?
I kind of do things more upfront. I think the first thing you'd have to do is you got to make sure your wife is your business partner, right? And is this your best friend? If this is your best friend, then proceed, right? I think that's a big mistake that people make is they're not going with their best friend, right? So you got to pick wisely. It's not your best friend. I mean, some people are getting married. Look, I got married, twice, right? I can tell you, if it's not your, in fact, the first time, I moved to Florida. I would consider my friend, she wasn't my best friend. Second time, much better, best friend, right? That's what I need to tell you. You got to find your best friend. And then from there, you guys can conquer the world together. It's much easier to conquer a pair of twos. If you have kids first, great. Congratulations. They get married, right? I think marriage gets delayed a lot. And I don't know why, right? I think people should get married much faster, you know? And that's a trend. The average family is 1.71 kids now, right? Under two, America dies. So we're dying as a country, right? If you don't have two is break even. More than two means we're growing. Less than two means we're losing. And I never get why people want less than two. I'm like, you're gonna lose resources. You'll have less that can go around. America's so much land, like open space everywhere. It's just a lot of people want to be in certain areas. This is a big thing. There's a lot of open areas, a lot of places you can start out easy and cheap. Just people don't want to make the sacrifice.
Yeah, and that goes back to your earlier conversation about if you want to start, sometimes you need to make a sacrifice, and sometimes that means not being in the location that you kind of envisioned for yourself, at least to start.
Yeah, that's it. You can always go back. And look, people do this all the time, right? You think, you think like in pro sports when some of these NBA players or NFL or whoever gets drafted, they want to go to certain cities and towns? No. They make millions. Or the same thing for doctors. They get offered a position. They didn't want to go there. I think some of these people want to go to and I'm not going to say the city, but a city where you may not want to go, right? And it's hard, right? And it's the same thing. People want to do things. There's a lot of music. A lot of these musicians, they don't make it for a long time. They're living out of a tour band, right? And so I think you got to be able to that's a big thing that you'll hear me talk about. You got to just make the sacrifice. If people are looking for no sacrifice, you're not going to be rich. There's no hope for you.
Yeah, there's always a
I'm
trade-off.
sorry.
You're gonna give it
There's
up
no
somewhere,
hope
right?
for those people. Like, you just like, just this, And like I said, in my mind, what I was told to me from someone very smart, there's like three types of people. Okay. There's never was this. So that's like never was successful. There's a has been. That means you were on top and successful, but you're just not at your prime. Like you're retired or whatever. And then there's on top of the game. And that's what they would say. You gotta be on top of your game. Right? Or at least been a has been. But to say I gotta convince a bunch of never was's, I'll never motivate those people. right? There never was, never will be, and there's not much hope there. Right. I know right away if someone will be successful. I can tell this right away because they're sticky. They're motivated. They'll do whatever it takes. Like you just know they're all in. They're engaged. High focus. Attention to like they're locked in. You can tell with the eyes. You can tell with the eyes. Like I know. They just want to win. You say, what do you like to do for fun? They say I want to win championships. But there is no easy way. Right? You either got to be all in and trying to do this or just, not do it.
Do you feel, Phil, because what I found from my, advising and coaching, that it feels like there's less and less people that are willing to sacrifice, less and less people that want to win.
Yeah, I agree with this. I think social media has done this to people. It's given the wrong values. It's taken away, great relationships. Let's get married young, start a family, let's buy a home. Let's start the super team right away. It's taken away from family. Now churches have made a comeback, right? It's true. But, and by the way, I'm not religious, but I just say this because I think this is a good thing I've noticed. That I live by a church and it's packed now. So it's doing much better. And I root for that because I know that will help. Anything that helps people be more successful and family oriented, I'm for. Even if that's not my religion, I'm for it. If that's gonna keep families together and successful and happy, sign me up. I'm for it. I learned that from my dad. I asked my dad once, I'm like, do you believe in God? I'm not kidding. I think what God wanted last. You believe in God? He wouldn't answer. I kept on asking my dad. Wouldn't answer. And he finally, after me being annoying for the longest time, he answered it. And he's like, look. And I actually asked my grandparents too this question during the Holocaust. And they said, look, they both kind of were there when I finally answered after 2 years of badgering. They said, it's not about that. It's about the traditions and sticking together as a family and learning and doing the right things. Not, if we think every lesson in the Bible, the Old Testament is accurate to the 100%. He's like, that's nonsensical. And I kind of take that away and I view what other people are doing now and thinking that's why I have so much respect for other people's religions and what they're doing. I'm like, yeah, I think that could, if they follow those traditions of what, they're supposed to be doing, and I think that could work out. If that means starting a family earlier, I think we got to kind of get back to that within the college campuses. If you're going to have these college campuses and that, that, and I think I saw randomly, there's this one college, I forget what it was. And everyone gets married there, so young. And they used it on Facebook, and I forget what it was. It was in the Midwest. I wish I remembered what college this was, but people were kind of making fun of it.
It's probably
And
Utah. It's probably Utah's school.
That was one of them. One of them. There's another one in the Midwest. And people are like, what do you think? Right? Because Utah, let's talk about that. They don't want alcohol, right? Let's talk about it. They don't want sex without marriage, right? And they don't they just want people to get married and have families, right? And you're like, well, what do you think? Right? I'm like, look, this is actually a good winning strategy. If I had to pick, right now as a parent, right? And I am a parent, you had to pick two. The greatest party school or Utah? I said in Utah, 100%, that is the better path. But most of America will be like, yeah, I want to go to the party school, right? And not that, right? I would tell people it's much better to go to that way and to stick together than the other way, right? I think the other way can be kind of bad and lead you down some bad paths, of regret, right? I mean, I mean, it makes so silly. Like, say you find like the perfect person, right? Like, well, let's just break up with them. I mean, there got to be a whole bunch of people that are like upset they broke up with Beyonce, or Taylor Swift. All right, all these people. In fact, there's a post of Taylor Swift where like the ex-boyfriend from prom made some comment, and I'm like, yeah, right? Like, imagine those were born in Utah. You'd bet a lottery ticket. I'm just saying, like, people will do have regret. And, I do think, like, obviously people have to mature. But if I had to pick one extreme partying or like extreme commitments, I think the commitment will lead to a much more fruitful life and actually much more wealth. And it's been proven.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Especially, nowadays there's so many people that they're not looking at the long-term implications of what they do. It's all about what's going to make me feel happy right now. And that's probably has to do a lot with social media comparison of other people. Additionally, when it comes to getting married so young, I think it's important because nowadays it seems very difficult for one person, one individual to be able to start the journey, to be able to start to purchase that home. You almost do need a team now. It's almost incentivizes to get started on that team earlier.
Yeah, I hope they do. I hope that's a blessing, Like I said, I've seen religion like really pick up, and I'm hoping it sustains. I know because of like Charlie Kirk, evangelist Christians have really like expanded, which is great. Whatever wins and expands is great. Good for America, right? But I think that's better. You say, well, what's the competition? See, someone would name another religion as the competition. No, that's not the competition. The competition is the reverse, to be like
Mhm.
atheists. This is the reverse. More people are becoming atheists than they are religious. This is the biggest thing. And you run into this even in Judaism, right? Because if a Christian is no longer Christian, you call him an atheist. But in Judaism, when you call a Jew that's not religious, you call him a Jew, right? And so, it creates this. I think a lot of people give that up for the self, glamourness. And I think it's very terrible. And I think more people need to stick together and start earlier. And, I think a real flex would be getting it, finding your right person at a young age. I think that's much more a bigger flex than a car. There's no better investment than kids.
I would agree with that. You know, we've talked a lot about the importance of buying a house, the importance of finding a car partner, the importance of taking responsibility. I'd like to take this podcast now to be a bit more practical, a bit more tactical for our listeners that have agreed with us into this point, but just don't know the right way. So I'd like to talk about mortgage strategies, just not mortgage rates. One thing we talked about
Okay,
before
yeah,
we, one thing we
perfect.
talked
And I'll
about,
get into this.
yeah,
Right. And it doesn't matter where you buy in the United States. If I was to buy any part of the United States, here is the first thing I would tell someone, right? Is if you need to get down payment assistance, there's great down payment assistance programs, is that you get your first mortgage because what most people don't understand is that the first mortgage and down payment assistance are integrated together, right? And you have to create alignments, right? So this has to happen, right? So those are together. And that will cover your down payment. The second part is what people don't know is that you'll need money for closing costs. And you're like, well, what do I do? Right? You try to get the seller to pay. And I know what people always tell me a lot. They're like, oh, the seller won't pay. And like, you're right. Depending of how long a home's in the market, they may pay 0, 1, 2, or 3%. I mean, sometimes they could pay 6%, but you're like, well, what do you think? Right? I think you need to think about it differently buying a home. You just can't, you need to go with a different strategy. So here's a strategy I would lay out for you so it's crystal clear. If I was a home buyer today, the first thing I do is I get pre-approved. This is what I do. I make sure I do an application. It's a soft credit check. I upload my documents, make sure my loan officer does everything. Then I go over a loan estimate. This is the step that's missed. I need to know all my numbers, and I need to know my cash to close. This is the most important thing. You need to know what you need to ask the seller for or have in your bank. And then you get your pre-approval. Do not accept the pre-approval unless you have your loan estimate. Then, when I'm working with a realtor, okay, here's what I do. I go to my realtor and say, look, and the biggest thing is when you're working with a realtor or anything in life, you need to create self-alignment. You need to then create the contrast, and then you build the relationship and you close, right?
Can
So
we double click on those first two, the two things you need to do before you start the contract and close?
yes. So the first thing is fill out an application. And what that is you'll get a link from your loan officer and I'll ask you about your employment, you know, how much money you have in the bank, and it'll pull your credit, maybe soft credit, your soft credit check. And then the second thing is you got to provide your documents. And I see this a lot, right? You got to want to provide your documents. If you work for a company, that's your last two W-2s, your most recent pay stubs, and your last two pay stubs from December. So be your 25 and your 24. The reason is that a lot of customers are on variable income, OT, bonus, commissions. And so as you get paid in 2026, every pay stub in 2026 will replace your pay in 2024 because it's a 2-year average, right? So as the year goes up, your year goes along, you'll make more money over time. So that's
Understood.
why you got to provide it to give them the accurate numbers. And also, so they understand, right? Not everyone understands because people are like, oh, we'll deal with that later. You don't want to deal with that later. You want to deal with it today so we can start to win.
And how do we calculate our down payment cash?
Yes. So your down payment cash is typically what you need for the down payment, less the credits from your down payment assistance, and then all your closing costs, less seller credits. That is why you need to see it on a loan estimate. So you have it memorized. You know what it will be. And that's what I would do. I would know your numbers. So you know you need $9 grand or $8 grand. And if you don't have this, if you don't have status alignment with your loan officer, then you definitely won't have it with your realtor. They'll create friction between your realtor and your loan officer and you, right? You don't want friction. You want to resolve it, and that's asking open-ended questions. The fastest way to resolve friction is to tell people that. And then the realtor would say, like, and I'll just explain, by the way, the car industry, say you see a car for $30,000 today, right? The dealership knows you're going to go to $28,000. You're like, okay. And then you're going to take a car loan for $34,000. So they know their net is $28,000. Like they just want to walk away with, you know, a certain number in mind. And then they let you finance the rest. And that's what they would tell you. Buying a home can be the same thing. But I'll tell you the issue in America today. The issue in America today is Zillification. You're like, what is this? I will explain it to you of what is wrong and what it looks like today and what I would do if I was you, right? Because we're trying to recreate it at Next Wave Mortgage. But I'll tell you what the issue is that what happens on Zillow or Realtor or these websites is you see a home, they get you on the phone. Hey, you want to see it? Boom. And they meet you at the home and it's very quick. And the whole goal is just to sell product like a car and move you along and get you under agreement. You don't know your numbers. You don't know your cash flow. And you're like, but I got a pre-approval. Yeah. They'll just figure it out later. Like, yeah, he'll borrow money or sell things or whatever. Like they got nothing to lose because the way they view it, and this is so messed up, is if you don't go under agreement, they don't have a sale. And if you do go under agreement, they might have a sale. Like if you go under agreement, that might close. But if you never go under agreement, it won't close. So they'd rather you go under agreement. And this is so counterintuitive, but you're like, how do they know I have all the money? They don't. They never really verified any of this stuff. In fact, I get inundated with phone calls all day long and appointments of people that need down payment assistance. And I know right away if they already have a bank, because what happens is that the banks that don't offer down payment assistance stay quiet because they don't offer it. The customers are loyal, right? They always are. Customers are probably more loyal than it should be. And a lot of time it was referred by the realtor. So they want to be like so loyal. And then what happens is that because they want to be loyal, it actually creates this like friction because they don't know how to solve this like down payment system. So I get like a lot of calls. But I always ask them this: I'm like, what car do you drive? They're like, oh, I drive a Ford. I'm like, if you bring that Ford to Toyota, and Toyota does not have the proprietary tools to fix Ford because they don't. I can't fix Ford. It's a proven fact. I'm like, does that mean you're not a loyal person? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, what's the difference? And it's because they didn't create that status alignment. And there's a lot of friction. A lot of people don't want to hit people straight up. And that creates, because they want to be deemed as loyal. And that's the big thing. It's a big push for loyalty. And I get it. I'm a loyal person. But if they can't help you, it doesn't. Right? So what I try to do is that's why I go over the loan estimate, because I know they need the money. And then I tell the realtors this, right? And I say, look, as opposed to them doing what I call the drip and drag method, see one home and see if you like the home like a car, and then run back home and putting in offers, do this back and forth stuff. I call it drip and drag. So that's the way it is. It's the way you should do it. If it's me, and I'm a first time home buyer and I want to get rich, I said, look, I want to buy with no money. Okay, let's go over the numbers. We know what you have to do. So in the loan estimate, we put the seller credit. So I go to them and I say this. I said, you know you need $8,000. So you give your realtor the list of the 10 properties you would like to negotiate with, right? And you say to them, ask what you want to net. So if they only want to net, so you know what the baseline number is. And then once say the home is say 300, and you say, yeah, it's been on 90 days, it'll take 290, and you need 15 grand of closing costs. Then once you have the 290, and then the seller doesn't feel like that he's losing. He's already agreed on the 290. So you need to negotiate the net price first, then roll in your closing costs to need no money. And now you can say, oh, but my monthly payment's so much more money. Okay, so let's talk about this. Is it so much more money? Right? Because say if I lend you $1,000 and 6% and $6, right? 100,600. We agree on this? So like if you're thinking about what's 10 grand, right? That's $60. 15 grand is 90. It's nothing. Right? And that's what I tell people. But you need to know your numbers. And the reason why I brought up 100,000 is that in unaffordable areas or areas where you say, this happened to me. I'll tell you a funny story. I had a customer, he wanted to buy a home. I said, you only can do $500,000. And every $500,000 person I get now is looking at like 530. But they really should be looking at 475, right? Whatever. Just like, I feel like this is like my luck. But I tell people this. I said, $500,000 home. So that's 500,000 times 6 is 3,000 a month, right? I said, just the mortgage. I said, so just on the mortgage, that's all you can afford. I said, but you want to buy a home for 530 or 600, right? I do, right? So I'll tell them, look, we might have to get a bigger seller credit to make this happen, right? But I'm financing more. I'm like, well, let's go over the number. I said, if we lend you at 5%, we buy down your rate permanently. No temporary buy down, permanent buy down. I said, $500,000 at a $600,000 house is also $3,000 a month. So you need to know your numbers so you can go deeper into the right strategies of affordability. And that is why you need the loan estimate and know how you should negotiate what I call, the 2.0 method, right? It's our next wave method. I go 2.0 because it's the right way to do it. And it does take, and people brought this up. You know what people said to me? I said, this is great, but people are like, you're gonna have to really train all your employees of this method. I'm like, we do. I'm like, this is why a lot of companies don't do it, because you have to create status alignment. You then have to create contrast, and then you got to be able to answer all the questions to build the trust, move them along. And a lot of people are like, that's a lot of training. Right? AI can't even do this now. I'm like, I know. I'm like, because it doesn't like understand like relationships and creating contrast and helping people understand like the right way of strategy, because we've been only taught the Zillow method, right? In fact, it's only getting worse. You're like, why? Google today is now launching their listings. They took it away and now they're relaunching it. And you're like, so we're gonna have all these generations of people buying homes like cars. And we're gonna have a big epidemic, but that's not the right way to do it. You need to pre-negotiate things. And I think that's the right way, the most brilliant way to kind of go about it. You go, well, what if I don't like the home? Look, once you've seen enough homes and you've like, you're gone, right? Like how much cologne do you need to, different clones you need to try on before you make a decision, right? And I think that's a good way to go about it. If not, you won't know your numbers, you'll overpay, you'll delay trying to buy a house. I just think it's, you know, you gotta kind of have to go through like I would call you know, the 2.0 method of buying home to be successful for people with down payment assistance.
Yeah, I think a lot of people nowadays, when they're finding their home, they're just looking at, can I afford the monthly payments? The exact same way that most people are shopping for cars nowadays. Can I afford the monthly payments? And at that point, I guess what would be the difference between getting approved and getting approved responsibly?
Yeah, it's knowing how to structure a deal correctly. This is exactly what it is. See, most people think it's all just the home price. No, you can structure the deal more securely, because like you could permanently buy down the rate and then finance it over time. I know people say, oh, it won't appraise. Any loan officer realtor will tell you, if you pull the data, homes appraised for like 98% of the time. So it's almost like a foregone conclusion, right? It's almost a definite that it will be, this would be like making the argument, what's more likely to happen? It not to appraise or Taylor Swift to not sell out a concert. These are both the same odds, near zero. Yes, it happens, but like way less likely than you think.
So I'd like to go back a little bit and help me and my audience think through how someone should think about their down payments, their monthly payments, their reserves, their future flexibility to be able to remain nimble when the world continues to change.
Yeah. And I would tell anyone, the first thing we need to do, I think, is just to understand numbers, right? I got 5, 6, 7. If $1,005 is $5, 10,000 is 50, 100,000 is 500. So when you're looking at numbers, you should be able to like know yourself without a calculator what something costs. Like this is like really important, is to train yourself to actually know what it costs, because it's actually simple math, right? And I think to know those numbers. And I would tell someone, it's better to have more money in the bank and not be like, so hyper focused on the monthly payment. The monthly payment's going to be easier over time because of inflation. Like it's just going to be fixed. You're going to make more money. The dollar's worth less. If you can afford it today, you'll definitely be able to afford it in 5 years. Because that's actually a question that people ask me. Well, if rent is 30% more, what are your thoughts? Well, homeownership is 30% more. When will it feel like renting? It's in about 5 years. But then you get tax breaks along the way. That's what I would tell you, right? I would do it that way. And I wouldn't wait. See, this is a big thing where people make a mistake, is waiting, because people are like, yeah, I'm going to wait. Okay, let's just do it. You're going to wait. $400,000 house, right? It goes up 10%. There it is, 440. It goes up again. So what? If 20%, like it just got so much more expensive. It's like you just bought it in the beginning. Like waiting costs you more. Unless you're an extremely high net worth or like high net worth earner, like the only people that should be waiting, there are certain type of people that should be waiting. I'll tell you who. Physicians that are like in medical school or fellows and they make like 60 grand. And then in like 3 years, they'll make like 400. Like, okay, there. But I would even make the argument just buy something now. Right? But it could be a distraction for people. But people that will definitely make more money in the future, certain jobs. That's what I would tell you.
For first-time buyers, what programs or options are often overlooked by people that like don't have their best interest at heart, or they don't even know to ask?
Yeah, I would say, typically the two segments are the state programs. It doesn't matter what state you are, it's always 640 credit score minimum. And it's because the state programs are sponsored by the federal institutions like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. So you got to have a 640. You're not doing less than 640. Now, the national programs, like that are sponsored through these like Native American programs. And I say Native American because like banks use the Native Americans federal charter as a loophole to like put these programs together. You typically need 600, right? 600 FICO. They're based on FHA. People don't know this, that you could go as low as a 600. But I would tell people this. If you've been late on any payment in the last 12 months, now's not the right time to buy. You want to be responsible. I tell people, if you've been late the last 12 months, yeah, you're not going to buy a house. It won't work. Not worth it. That's the first sign. That's how I know. It's not based on the credit score. It's based on your responsibility. If you've been late, no way. It won't be you won't do well. Right? You're not ready for it. You've had a late. There better be a good reason why you're late.
Yeah, and that comes
And,
back to
and
that
even then,
personal
they'll tell you to wait
responsibility.
12 months.
Yeah, it goes back to the personal responsibility that we talked about before we got into the nitty-gritty of that. Earlier, you talked about down payment assistance. Could you explain what down payment assistance programs are and who are they actually
Yeah,
good for?
let me get into the down payment assistance programs. So I'll get into the federal ones first. So the down payment assistance programs are first mortgage and the second mortgage. The most popular ones that are really growing right now are these FHA down payment assistance. Typically, FHA needs 3.5% down payment. So they have these two down payment assistance, either 3.5 or 5%. But they tell people this. The way I look at it is I have two categories in mind, forgivable and non-forgivable. If you're less than a 640, you only have the option of non-forgivable. Non-forgivable down payment assistance, the second mortgage is usually 2% above the first mortgage rate. So if your first mortgage rate 6, your second mortgage rate is 8. Okay? And it's amortized for 10 years. This is true. The forgivable down payment assistance is actually, it comes with a higher rate on the first mortgage, but the assistance is either forgiven in 36 months or 5 years, right? 60 months. And like why I think it's such a great deal is, let's just say your rate's 7% and the down payment assistance is forgiven in 36 months. If you took like the first mortgage payment and you subtracted it from the savings that are being forgiven. So you take what you're receiving divided by 36 months. Your blended interest rate over 36 months would be less than 5.5%. And that's like a big hat if you can afford it. And that's why some people that make like a ton of money will actually do this. Like I've had a couple of people that make a lot of money and they've done this. And they mean a lot. I mean, just like 200 grand or 180, 230. They don't want to touch their money. Some of them don't care, but that I like the down payment assistance forgivable the best. The state programs, like overall, they're kind of regulated by the state. They got their ups and downs. I mean, you look at it like Florida's great. Typically their down payment assistance are no interest, no payments, which is great. You pay back when you sell the house or, refinance. They do have one forgivable loan, but the interest rate stinks. But you got to be careful with some down payment assistance programs because the first rate is a little bit higher. But that's why, like, in certain states, it doesn't really matter as much because whether your payment is like, whether your rate's 6, 7, or 8 in like a lot of Florida, it's like irrelevant. Like, if your average price in Florida is $374 and you and your wife make like $175, and I tell you your rate 7, you're like, whatever, I'll sign. Like, they don't care because you're only solving for down payment assistance. In other states, you're trying to, it's like hard because you also have to solve for monthly payment assistance. And that can be really painful for people, right? Because homes are really expensive. And in fact, California Dreams program, tell me about it. I'll tell you and they give you 20% for your down payment, which you pay back when you sell the home. And then they want 20% of your equity. It's called shared appreciation. And that sounds nice, right? And basically that means if you buy a house for $500,000, and you don't sell it, and then your retirement's $2 million, you sell the home, right? Because I actually want to tell you this. If you buy a house for $500,000 and it goes up, say, 8% a year in 30 years, that's $5 million. So you get into a shared appreciation and you buy a house, say, for $500,000 in 30 years, it's $5 million, and you gave up 20%. You gave up $1 million. Plus, you're $500,000. You're like, dude, I'm down to 3.5. You're like, no way. In fact, that's California, right? And I know people are like, but look, Maine actually outlawed shared appreciation programs. You're like, no way. Yeah, they did. And you're like, wow, that's the difference of 2 states. Yeah, I heard Maine's less expensive than Orange County. Right? Like I don't know, right? And then you got Texas. That's like one of the only states I know of. There may be others that have a 3-year forgivable down payment assistance program. So you're like, what do you think? You got to get in. The same thing that you get it. It's going to cover it covers your down payment, and you figure out a way for the seller to work with you, to finance it. And that has to be the right mentality. You got to work with the seller. They're not going to absorb the whole loss. Car dealerships don't absorb a whole loss. So why do you think a seller will? Right? You buy a car, they're not like, I'm going to pay your $5,000. They're like tough noogies. They're like, I'm paying nothing. They're like, you're paying that. They're like, we're not paying that. Right? They're like, your problem isn't our problem. You want the car? That's it. That's why they have their own finance department. This is literally why every car dealership is their own finance department. It used to be an issue. It used to be back in the day, credit unions and banks would do more of the car loans. They don't anymore. Why? There was so much back and forth. They couldn't do it because damn, when the car is getting expensive, you had to have your own dealership because Samantha would I'm only going to buy a $20,000 car. But a weekend later, it's $42,000. And what you got pre-approved with has to be re-underwritten versus the car dealership guy that they get to underwritten in 5 seconds. But they're willing to work with you. But I'm against people buying these brand new cars, by the way. I think it's a terrible idea. I would set rules of how many cars you can own in your lifetime. I mean, this is just the thing. People think it's a flex, driving a fancy car and showing your watch. It's not. That's not a flex. That's definitely not a flex. Because like the richest people don't. You ever see Warren Buffett do this? Flex like this? You ever see Steve Jobs ever do that? Or Elon Musk? Or the founders of Google? I mean, maybe, yeah, okay, I get it with Bezos. You see him on his yacht now. Okay. But not a car. That's not a flex. Ridiculousness. Right?
Phil, a lot of the people that I work with, consult and I coach, are business owners for Monzon Wealth. What is something that our listeners that are business owners, 1099 earners, people with non-traditional income, why is it so much harder for them to get a mortgage? What do they need to consider?
Well, I think the biggest thing they need to consider is to actually create alignment with the loan officer before they buy. And the CPA. Because it's not always the CPA's fault. They don't know that you're trying to buy a home, and it is harder, right? But, being a broker and having more options, it's not as flexible. But one thing I would tell you is that you got to make sure your credit's in line. And I would also say you got to work with a CPA that's willing to like openly communicate and not stink, right? That's what a good CPA is, planning ahead, right? I remember one time, I'll tell you a great CPA. I had a guy that had a construction company, landscaping construction in Boston. And he had an opportunity, this is many years ago, to buy like a 2-family in Newton, Mass, 487. And I knew the kid from high school. And I told him, his CPA is like, yeah, I'll do it. When we file your taxes, you're going to have to pay more. He's like, how much more? He's like, 30 grand more. That's what we talked about. I'm like, you only have to do it 1 year. Because once you file, you're good because you've been self-employed for like over 5 years. And he's like, all right. And he did it. And he closed. And it was like, he was like so upset. Like he had to pay all these taxes. But, now I talked to him many years later. And if you look up Newton, Mass, what a 2-family costs. What does it cost? I mean, his is worth close to 3. But the average 2-family, no way. Yeah, it was the best. He owns other property now, but it taught him something. That you got to create alignment with your CPA. Yeah, he actually got to other businesses, but that was like a good like thing to go through. Of like, yeah, that worked out, and that was the smartest investment that he made. One of them, but all of the good ones have been real estate. But if you own it, you just got to create alignment. You got to talk with people. I always talk with people ahead of time, and yeah, there will be a debt to be paid, but that doesn't mean that you'll have less money in the bank after you buy, right? Because you use less of a down payment. So you just might have to suck it up for 1 year. I think a big mistake that people make is they start refiling all their taxes. It's planning ahead.
Yeah.
Having a real conversation. Planning ahead is like the dentist. I recommend a teeth cleaning. That you need less cavity fillings.
Yeah, it's amazing how much pain can be dealt with by just thinking a little bit ahead of what things are going to come down the pike and how can I fix them before they become a problem. Now, Phil, as we come to a close here on the podcast, we are the FI guys, and FI stands for financial independence. Where do you think homeownership fits into financial independence?
I think it's the core principle. I think it's number one. And this is by far the right way to go about it is financial. You got to be able to make it there. There's no doubt about it. And I would recommend people get a coach. I'm just not saying this. Like, I mean it. Most people would be better paying off a real people to help them to achieve this. And I think your organization is a great organization, right? And I think people need help more than they know, right? You want to get jacked? Go get a personal trainer. You want to be good at basketball? Get a basketball coach. You want to be good at music? A music coach. But you got to take, in fact, Kobe Bryant had a basketball coach. Same with Michael Jordan. Like, all these people have coaches, right? I think the downfall of people is they eventually get rid of their coaches and they're not good anymore, right? So I think homeownership is the easiest one to go. And I pray that everyone can achieve it.
Do you think that buying a home is always a good wealth building move?
If the person's mature enough, they can't lock into it. See, you can lock into things, right? But I would say for 99%, if you just buy the home and hold on to it and just save your money and don't stop making sacrifices. This is the big thing, I think. People buy the home and then they revert back to old behavior. You need to be willing to make the sacrifices. Always. It doesn't stop. You always got to do it. That's what I would tell people. You always, and and just to let you know, I saw that movie about Steve Jobs with Ashton Kutcher.
Mhm.
I mean, this guy, what was that movie about? A brilliant guy that made more sacrifices. I saw that and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I could have made all those sacrifices. I mean, he gave up his kid in the beginning. I mean, I would never recommend anything. That was terrible. But that's the worst extreme. I think there's a happy middle extreme where we make it the center. And you put beautiful kids in this house.
What do you say, Phil, to someone who's listening to this podcast, knows they want to get into the game? There's someone who feels behind because they haven't been able to buy yet. What should they do next?
Yeah, I would say what my grandma told me, and I know that feeling of being behind, a feeling that things are getting further behind. But my grandma told me that it's a long journey and just be patient. And this came out of real frustration because all my brother and sister and everyone with all these fancy schools, Ivy League schools, at this is young age, these kids are scoring perfect. And then here I was busting my ass and struggling. I got ADD and dyslexic, struggling for a C. This is early, like I'm 48 before everyone knew about all these things. I'm struggling, working 3 times as hard. And now my grandma told me was life's a long journey. Just be patient. She was right. Now I would tell you, don't rush. You could be patient. We just got to get you started. It's okay. Remember, it's not how you start, it's how you finish.
Phil, you've been so kind and generous with your knowledge here today on the podcast to both myself and my audience. I'd like to give you the podcast at this point to shout out yourself. And of course, anything that you give me, I can put down in the link below.
I say, if anyone has any questions, I'm here just to connect, and you can reach me 617-529-9317, 617-529-9317. You can add me on LinkedIn at Ask Your Mortgage Expert, the same thing. Handle at Instagram, or I'm Phil Ganz. Just Google me, but send me a text. I'm pretty receptive, and I do want to help people, and that's where my heart really comes from, is helping people. And I'm not here to sell anyone. I really want to help you. And if you need anything, just let me know. And I think if everyone helps everyone, they'll make this place a little bit better.
I would agree. Phil, here at the Fi Guys, obviously we stand for financial independence. And what we found from doing this for a few years, or doing this for a while now for myself, is that financial independence means very different things to different people. So, Phil, may I ask you, what does financial independent mean to you?
Financial independence means you can retire and live the lifestyle you want. That's independence. No sacrifice. That is the time you don't make a sacrifice. That you really get to enjoy life. You get to enjoy your grandkids and all this stuff. It's where life gets fun.
I love that. I love that. Phil Ganz, thank you so much for joining me here on the Fi Guys podcast. To our listeners, if you got value out of today, and based off what Phil said, I don't know how you couldn't. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, but most importantly, grab that share button, throw it into a text, and send to someone that needs this information, someone that might be looking for a house, someone who feels behind. Show them that there is hope at the end of this tunnel, and that all it takes is getting started. Phil, again, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
This video podcast is sponsored by Monzon Wealth. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. We do not endorse specific products or services. Past performance does not guarantee future results. The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests, not the podcast sponsor.
It is crucial to consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional who can provide advice tailored to your specific needs before making any financial decisions, investments, or taking any other actions. If you are seeking specified help, you can reach out to Chris at monzonwealth.com.